Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Power of Print Pop series for 2024. For those that do not know me, I am Kelly Northwood, Chief Executive Officer of the Visual Media Association. I think we may be at week 4, so halfway mark, although I suspect there might be a couple of bonus webinars that are being lined up, such as the success of this series. We have absolutely beaten our records of attendance and registration. So I thank you all for being active participants in this year's series. I also, as I do every week, but there really doesn't seem like enough time to thank our sponsoring partners enough, to Rico and Media Super. You really have allowed us to bring this webinar series to our members. We cannot do all the things that we want to do on our membership subs alone, and having the opportunity to partner with organisations such as Rico and Media Super, who are genuine industry partners and genuinely committed to the future, better business programs and sustainability and longevity of a successful industry. Thank you to Rico and Media Super for your support in this series. We are building on to our second week across sustainability. And this week brings a little bit of a pip in my step, as they say, as I am welcoming today a speaker that I've worked with for a number of years, and we work together across the Two Sides campaign globally. He's a great friend also. I'll talk more about Jonathan's talk and his discussion in a moment that's coming up. But I also just want to run housekeeping. These series are being recorded. There is a chat box. You can talk throughout in the chat box, but up until this point and throughout the presentation, you will all be muted. I will even mute myself. It's a rarity, but it does happen. And we will continue the presentation through. There'll be a Q&A discussion at the end, and we will then close for the session tomorrow or in the next 48 hours from this presentation. The recorded link and the class notes will be sent to everyone who registers, as well as all of our members. You can actively share that to all of your colleagues. This content is about knowledge sharing, so please feel free to share all of that information to the network, industry, colleagues, peers. So without further ado, I would like to I'd like to introduce Jonathan Tame. He's the Managing Director of New Vision Consulting, Two Sides Campaign, and Carbon Co, which is a carbon balancing program, all focused on paper and print industry sector. He heads up the entire global program for Two Sides from the United Kingdom, and he also heads up the United Kingdom and Europe program of Two Sides and Carbon Balance Paper, Carbon Co, across UK and Europe also. Two Sides, I'll let Jonathan talk about. Obviously, we're running the campaign across Australia and New Zealand, have been for some 12 years, I think 13 years next year, which is tremendously exciting. One of the things that I have learned to love and enjoy about working with Jonathan is he is two ears, one mouth, really open to ideas, a very considered thinker across how we can really ensure this campaign is really targeting and raising awareness, but also education. We get a lot of myths presented across paper and print, and when you have a true ambassador and advocate like Jonathan blazing the trails, it's a wonderful an inspiring program to be part of. He's always a terrific support and never says no to any of my harebrained schemes, which makes him a wonderful human in my book. So welcome to Jonathan to talk to us today about Two Sides and how, as printers, we can really utilise these campaigns to communicate and educate our customers across the environmental story our industry has to tell. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hello. By some of those words, and yeah, it's been a great pleasure working with you over the many years, because I think not just us but everyone who's in the Two Sides campaigns are true ambassadors and advocates of promoting paper's role and the sustainability of paper, particularly trying to reach consumers and get our message across. So it's a great pleasure to be talking to you today. I'm really pleased because we're coming into our summer, and of course you're going into your winter. Although saying that, it's probably still going to be hotter in Australia and New Zealand than it is in the UK, but it's still something that we look forward to every year, even though it's likely to be a miserable cold summer. So look, I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes giving you an update on the Two Sides global campaign to really give you an overview of some of the activities that's happening globally. And I think, you know, one of the start points is, why was the Two Sides campaign important? And these are things that you've probably heard for many years, you still hear now. And these comments, which are so often heard, so regularly said, are just unhelpful to the print and paper industry. You know that many of them are myths, and it's really important that we challenge these myths, that paper and print is a sustainable means of communications. So Two Sides, we're a not-for-profit campaign. As Kelly said, it's global. Our campaigns are delivered in the areas in green, and all the campaigns in those continents are delivered as separate campaigns. So in North America, the facts we deliver are based on the facts of forestry, recycling and activities in North America. In Europe, where I concentrate mostly on, the facts are predominantly around European paper making, European recycling rates. And in Australia, Kelly and her team focus very strongly on what's happening in Australia. We're not for profit. We have 600 members globally, and our members come from right away across the sector, from paper makers to distributors to the OEMs, the equipment manufacturers. This is just really anyone who's invested in producing print, delivering it into the consumer's hand, either as mail or packaging, newspapers or magazines. We have a network of global country managers, they're seen there, and I'm really pleased to have worked, as I said, with Kelly over many years, and we're really keen to ambitiously promote the Two Sides messages and provide resources and materials for the printers, paper makers, distributors to use in Australia and New Zealand. I always try and remind myself that we do three key things. We tackle misleading statements that paper and print are somehow bad for the environment. We must reassure consumers that our products made from paper are sustainable, they're from natural, renewable materials, and then we must provide the industry with facts and information that collectively, together, we can be out there promoting the sustainable attributes of our products. So I'm going to go through these three key areas of work that we focus on. But let me first start with a bit of research. The research we do is quite important because we want to understand what consumers think. This is research that we did undertake globally. We updated every 2 years. In Australia and New Zealand, Kelly runs similar parallel research, but focusing on the same key things to find out what consumers' environmental perceptions are of our industry. Look at our reading habits, looking at packaging, but also on tissue products. But the bit I want to concentrate on today is consumers' perceptions of environment and reading. So it was a global study. It was done by an independent research company. You can see the countries that it was delivered within. I predominantly look after Europe, and some of the facts I'm talking about particularly are based on what's happening in Europe. The headlines of this research showed, because we do this every 2 years, that COVID did have an immediate impact on consumer reading preferences. But post-pandemic, it has shown significant recovery. With bills and statements, consumers want the choice. They do not want to be pushed online. And they do understand that service providers are greenwashing, and their primary reasons to move consumers to digital communications is to reduce costs. Paper's perception has improved since the last survey, but environmentally, certainly within Europe, consumers remain concerned that forests in Europe are shrinking in size. It has improved, but we've got a lot of work to do. And they do not understand the industry's great recycling rate. And these are the things that we need to really focus on in our messages, that actually our materials come from natural, renewable, sustainable forests, and actually it can be easily recycled into new products. The other key thing which came out was packaging. Undoubtedly, paper, certainly within Europe, is the preferred environmental choice. So look, I'm going to concentrate on a few things quickly. These were the statistics which came out of Europe, but I believe, talking to Kelly, that it was fairly similar in Australasia, and that is that 58% of consumers agree they don't pay much attention to advertisements online. However, 42% don't pay attention to adverts received in the post. More people pay more attention to adverts received through the mail. The other really important thing about digital advertising we need to remind brands is that the great tendency for consumers to try and block these online adverts coming through in the first place. 63% of consumers say they're more likely to act when they see printed or mail ads, and they trust printed ads and direct mail ads. There's some really great messages that we need to communicate with brands. For paper packaging, paper undoubtedly is the preferred choice for 10 out of 15 attributes compared to other packaging materials, but particularly for the environmental criteria, that it's compostable, that they believe it's better for the environment, and that it's easier to recycle. Paper packaging is the preferred choice when it comes to environmental packaging choices. And that's a message that we need and we must convey to brands when they're considering how they become more sustainable in the future and their sustainable packaging choices. So let's go through some of the activity and work that Two Sides does. As we said, an important thing we do is we tackle these negative statements that paper and print are somehow bad for the environment. We call it anti-greenwash campaign, and here are some examples. One of my favourite is British Gas, the one right in the centre. Help us save the planet by going paperless. This is a fossil fuel energy company who is encouraging their customers to save the planet by going paperless. You know, this is a ridiculous, unfair, untrue statement, and it conflicts with European advertising regulations, and I'm fairly sure it's the same in Australia and New Zealand. But you know, companies can't make these exaggerated green claims unless they're borne out by fact. The one in the middle is in English, well, you should be able to read that. The other ones, of course, are in other languages, but it's important to understand that greenwashing isn't limited to Australia, New Zealand, the UK, North America. This happens throughout Europe, and it's really important. Two Sides writes we engage these organisations to stop. The reason it's important is these brands have such high reach. They reach millions of consumers. A good example in the UK, on the left, a bank, TSB, encouraging customers to go paperless because it saves trees, it saves energy, it saves CO2. We write to these organisations, we encourage them to desist because it's not based on fact. We give them the evidence and the proof, and generally organisations will remove these statements. A summary at the end of last year or coming into this year. To date, Two Sides have engaged and changed the messages of over 1,100 companies globally. And these are some of the very biggest companies. And a really good example there, Adobe. We've had a recent case in Adobe in Germany and throughout Europe, where they were encouraging customers to use PDF, go paperless, and help save the environment. Two sides had a number of meetings with Adobe. They agreed that it was an error on their behalf. I mean, bear in mind, every piece of print that is outputted probably starts as a PDF or other electronic document, but also everyone within the sector, every printer is using Adobe as part of their packages. This is just a senseless message that Adobe are putting out. So working with organizations, engaging with them, two sides, gets them to agree that Adobe agreed they made an error with this message and have agreed not to make these statements any further. Brands are starting to realize that actually by cutting off print, by not using it, they're actually seeing sales decline. A really good example in Europe was Boden, who removed their catalogues. And actually Boden published very recently that it was an error. They realized they weren't connecting with their customers. There is nothing more powerful than a brand putting their materials, their brand into customers' hand, and Boden admitted they'd made an error and are increasing again their publications of catalogues because it's a good and proven way to connect with customers. And we need more case studies like this. As an industry, we need to be able to talk positively about the brands who use print and how it's working for them. And I know that's something that Kelly and her organization does very successfully, really trying to pull out case studies about how brands can be effective using print. So we know consumers are concerned with print's impact on the environment, paper and paper-based packaging. How do we reassure, how do we reach consumers that paper is actually a sustainable communications medium? Within Europe, and I think this has been used in Australia and New Zealand, we created a Love Paper campaign, and through adverts in national newspapers and magazines with very simple messages that forests in Europe are sustainable, the high recycling rate of paper, and that also it creates sustainable livelihoods and jobs. You know, sustainability isn't always about environmental reasons, but it's about the economy as well. That paper, print and paper-based packaging is a sustainable industry to be in. We created a campaign with adverts in newspapers and magazines which were published globally. In Europe, last year we had over 2,000 adverts, not just physically in print, but within social media. We do a huge amount of social media, but we try and reach millions of consumers every year to reassure them of the sustainable and natural nature of our products. I know the campaign has been used within Australia and New Zealand, but I suspect and understand that there will be some changes coming. But the other important thing we do with Love Paper is it's a really good way for brands to tell the sustainable story of the paper they use. So this was never intended to replace the Recycle Now logo or the FSC logo, PEFC, but to complement that, because it led to a web-based resource which showcased the sustainability of paper-based products. So Love Paper, increasingly used by brands and organizations throughout Europe, and there are some examples there of brands who've used it. But whether it's Love Paper or whether it's any other device, I think this is something we need to work with organizations, we need to work with brands to help them tell the very positive story about paper and paper-based packaging and its sustainability, that it's made from natural, renewable materials. So two sides, we tackle greenwash, we tackle misleading statements that paper is a sustainable medium. We promote to consumers through the Love Paper campaign. But one of the key things to give us all the facts that we need and to provide information for the industry to use is through the huge resource of materials that Two Sides publishes for the sector to use. And I'm just going to cover a few of these now as examples. The most popular for us, certainly in Europe and North America, has been the Myths and Facts booklet. This is a very simple but detailed, I think it's a 28-page A5 publication, but it's covering all the key myths and truths about sustainable forests, about forest certification like FSC, PEFC, about the high recycling rates. This is for me the Bible of our industry for sustainability, and any question that you as a printer, paper producer, manufacturer will be asked, the answers for your salespeople are contained within this booklet. We have a slight variation, a packaging booklet. Now, for many years, I know Kelly's in Australia and New Zealand has produced the Myths and Facts booklet, and I think the packaging booklet is coming. This is a little bit more honed in, a little bit more focused about packaging, much the same subjects, but also covering about protection and about how good packaging protects products. It avoids waste, particularly in the food sector. So these are our two Bibles for paper and paper-based packaging. It's also supported by a huge amount of fact sheets. Now, these are a lot more detailed, again, on those same subjects, but just a lot more detail about sustainable forests, about recycling, about our use of renewable energy, the facts about water. Yeah, of course, we use water in paper making, but this is processed water. And as most of you will be familiar with, processed water in paper making is returned fairly much to the environment in as good an order as it was taken out in the first place. But the paper industry has a good record as far as water consumption is concerned, but it's important that this paints out the facts and dispels many of the myths. As you can see from the screenshots there, our information sheets, and in fact, all of our booklets are produced in multi-languages throughout Europe, so Italian, German, French, Portuguese, Spanish by the end of this year. So if actually you're doing any learning courses, you might want to download it and do your language training by reading our resources in different languages. The ones I'm showing you in Europe, we're focusing on the European facts, but of course the ones that Kelly produces for Australia and New Zealand are really honing in on the facts about Australian paper making and recycling rates in Australasia. We've also published a number of insight articles. Now, unlike fact sheets, there might not be a direct conclusion. The latest one we've published, which is best, print versus digital. This is a question which we're asked repeatedly and, often by brands and marketing people. Which is best, digital or print? Well, of course, it's not that simple. It really depends, are you talking about environment? Are you talking about impact? Are you talking about reading, retention and learning? This was actually a particularly difficult information sheet for us to create, and I don't think it concluded specifically one was better than the other. It's about how the two actually, I think, work together. So our range of insight articles aren't coming necessarily up with full conclusions. They're a bit more bloggy, a bit more subjective, but there is a range of insight sheets, and the latest one is focused on perhaps some of the European research, but digital or print is a question we're asked very often, so we try and cover these popular subjects. And then we also produce a huge amount of factographics and mini videos. So from our research, we pull out some of the key facts. These provide really good social media postings, not just for Two Sides, but for also our members, our stakeholders, anyone within the industry. And as you can see, these again, excuse me, are published in multi-languages, but are really little sound bites that are great for us to produce in our social media. So all these are ideal for us to share, but also for our stakeholders to share. And Kelly and her team will be producing these, and they'll soon be available for you to use. All of our materials can be personalized for our members and supporters. So this is really a very simple way for your sales teams to have materials, not just to explain the myths and the facts and the truths, but that are also branded with your material. So I would advocate strongly that our materials will be good and supportive of you when you're out trying to convince people why print and paper is the sustainable choice. What underpins our campaign, of course, is a website. Huge amount of information on the Two Sides Australian website, always being developed, always being refreshed, has a lot of facts and news, and you should sign up to the newsletters, but a huge amount of information on the website. We also do events and training around the world, and I personally love the sound of my own voice, hence why Kelly's brought me in to talk to you today. But I know Kelly does a lot of events around the region, and we're only too happy to come and talk at your organisations. The power of Zoom, the power of Teams makes it really easy now for us to jump online and do simple training sessions with staff or with your customers. But I think, to try and wrap this up, Two Sides publishes a lot of information, a lot of resources. Tackling greenwash is really important, and that's something that we do. However, only together can we tell the great story about paper-based packaging. It is up to us as an industry to work together. Two Sides produces a huge amount of tools and resources, and I hope it's something that you as customers, as members, as stakeholders, you find our materials really useful to help really tell the facts about our industry. So I'm sorry it's been a bit of a monologue so far, but I think if I go to the next slide, it hands back to Kelly so I can take a sip of water while she interrogates me with difficult questions.
Never interrogate you. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I love all of that. Such a great, concise summary to what is almost 12 years in Australia. I think 14 years from the UK originally. This is a very successful and growing campaign across now, I think, 13 countries. What I really want to share with everyone listening, all of the VMA members have access to this campaign. VMA is continuing to invest in this campaign, as we are also with the Australasian Paper Industry Association. So I really love some of those stats around water and processed water. We're also talking with our Brazilian country manager, Fabio, who is we're just actually on a call this morning talking about how we're going to develop an Amazon fact sheet for Australia. I get that a lot as we travel around. Well, what about the Amazon? And so these are all myths that somehow get sort of stuck on and attached to our industry. And when you actually break down to the real detail and facts, which is what Two Sides is all about, verified, credible information to share knowledge for our industry, and getting some of those differences between water usage and processed water, and also looking at some of the great initiatives across energy in Japan with their paper mills. These are stories that often on the headlines are missed, and that's what Two Sides is all about. So, yes, to all our members, you can, as we're about to start talking, and I'm going to start asking the tricky questions with Jonathan, all the members listening, start thinking through now how you can use this content. You can take the content and put it in your presentation slides. You can put it in your own reports. You can, as Jonathan's shown, put your logo on the front of the existing artwork. This is your campaign, and the key purpose of this campaign is to raise awareness with verifiable, credible information. So let's share that and amplify that as best we can. So a bit of a Q&A. Let's go. I mentioned that in Australia we've been running this, Jonathan, for 12 years now. Do we still need to do it? I mean, we're seeing brands sort of making some different decisions. We're seeing some information. What are your thoughts on the purpose of continuing?
I think it's more important than ever, actually, Kelly. I've never been so busy. I think sustainability is the number one thing for many brands. It certainly is for the paper and print sector within Europe. We are continually getting requests for help, for support, for difficult questions, because I think the industry more than ever is under enormous scrutiny, and that scrutiny is coming from brands, it's coming from agencies and marketing companies, because all brands, all retail are under enormous pressures to be seen to be doing the right thing, both through their packaging choices, but also to defend their use of direct mail, to defend their use of catalogues. So I think we've got to be able to answer difficult questions. And, we don't live in a perfect world. I think, you mentioned the Amazon, and we can't, as an industry, escape from the problems of deforestation, which are global travesties. But what we do have to be able to do is to communicate the very sound environmental practices that our industry has introduced and continues to develop. But it's critical more than ever, I think, for us to continue with this Two Sides campaign and make sure that all within our industry are armed with the facts to be able to have proper, truthful, robust conversations with brands, stakeholders, anyone who is questioning why print and paper are the sustainable choice.
I think that's right, in that perhaps the beginning of my Two Sides journey actually was really defensive. And I felt that, I was just constantly sort of defending. But I think now there's a little bit less defense, and there's still defense at times, but all industries, and I often say this to our members, whether it's from environmental or other business areas, IR, workplace relations, it's all businesses are more accountable now than ever before. So, plastic, single-use plastic is under significant scrutiny. Television, I was reading something from the BBC about their GHG footprint. So we, like all industries, must be transparent, must have our facts right, must have our finger on the ball, on the pulse around making sure that we're continuing to reduce our footprint and continuing to improve our footprint. We have a great story, environmental story to tell, and we've got great credibility, and we need to get rid of the myths so we can actually get on focusing with keeping transparent. So I think to those saying, oh, well, we've sort of got people, the tide is turning, I absolutely agree with you. That doesn't mean that we don't still, as an industry, need to be sophisticated across our information and our content and our verification and credentials. So, and the retailers are desperately seeking this information too now, because they want to use printed products, and they want to use everything that they do must be compliant to their ESG, environmental, social governance policies. So we must be sophisticated enough to keep campaigns like Two Sides and transparency across our footprint. And I've got to do a shout out to the mills, because whether it's Europe, Asia, or North America, the mills are really terrific with the content that they're developing across the environmental footprint. I'm sure you'd agree. The I just tapped on then, Jonathan, about the brands responding and sort of, I take great delight at the moment, and I'm sort of posting on LinkedIn a little bit crazily, where, I'll walk through a supermarket and I'll say, I'm made from paper, you can recycle me. Things like this are now on front and center on packaging. And brands, switching from single-use plastic bags to paper. There's a bit of new environmental discussion around McDonald's changing plastic straws to paper straws. They're not always people's preferences, because they do get a little bit mushy down the bottom of your drink. But these sort of initiatives that are very public have helped, the discussion around paper. What are examples of how we as printers, they're all sort of major brands, but what about our mid-tier customers? How, as printers, do you suggest we can tap into what, say, some of the major supermarkets, ours here, Tesco's, ours are Woolworths, Coles and Aldi's, like your Tesco's and Lidl's and so on. How do you recommend some of our printer sales teams can actually really tap into what the big guys are doing to their mid-tier customers?
I think obviously I can't talk what's happening in your area of the world, Kelly, but I think what we've seen certainly throughout Europe, in the UK, particularly Germany and France, is that it's not just the largest companies now who are demanding attention to resource efficiency, to management of CO2 emissions. And I think as printers, the industry needs to be able to talk in an informative way to help their customers reduce their impacts, and in a way that can help show what those reductions are. So being more resource efficient, being able to give good advice about pagination, about reducing maybe reducing grammage, but i.e. ways to be more efficient. And I don't know where you are in the carbon journey, but I presume this is something which is probably coming if you haven't got it already, but to be able to have educated conversations with end users about their choices of pagination of sizes, and to be as efficient as they possibly can. So I think, we shouldn't just always think about the retailers. We shouldn't always think about the biggest brands. Certainly our experiences are within Europe that all companies now, all mid-sized companies, are really trying to address their environmental impacts. And we almost need to move into an advisory role where we're front-footed, where we can say to organizations, we can help you manage, we can help you reduce your impacts, and come up with some new clever ways for them to not just be able to do this, but for them to be able to report it as well.
I agree. I read a case study which you actually facilitated the webinar discussion with IKEA, moving from wood-based pallets to fibre-based pallets. And not only are they saving $83 million Australian each year in freight and material costs, but they talked about the freight costs being significantly reduced because they don't have to ship the wooden pallets back and forth. The paper or the fibre-based pallets are able to be readily recycled. We're seeing that with Nestle in store. The Nestle ran a Magi Combi van point of sale program that was run across New Zealand. That was all fibre-based, so it was able to be sent flat packed, reduced freight footprint, and then recycled at store once the campaign had been completed. We're seeing this more and more across the retailers. So for the sales sales account managers listening to this call, these are the discussions, not, oh, I'm trying to get rid of paper because it's bad for the environment. We've got the answer to that myth. However, how we can help reduce freight and other GHG or carbon emissions. And to Jonathan's point, lightening a grammage, paperweight, or looking at different sort of shortening sizes. HarperCollins didn't communicate it very well, but just changing a font, reduce some sheets in each book. These are ways that we can talk about carbon emissions rather than paper being presented incorrectly. So, and also customers want to hear from you. So download the blogs and the fact sheets and the information, just share it with your customers. It's just a consultative sales process too. You talked about packaging, Jonathan. Now, we're about to start that journey here. We've always been the graphic communications sort of side from commercial print paper perspective. Is the fibre-based or paper packaging discussion more readily understood, or are you finding that this is just as challenging as when we sort of started with graphic comms papers?
Well, I think a targeted campaign to talk about the sustainability of fibre-based packaging is really important, Kelly. I think, if we're not careful, the packaging producers think, well, everyone's turning off plastics and they're turning into paper. We don't really have an environmental problem. We don't need to do anything. We don't need to reassure people. Paper is seen, as we said earlier, as the environmental solution. But there are still worrying questions being asked. Does paper-based packaging and the huge rise in paper-based packaging, particularly in e-commerce, is this bringing unsustainable pressures on forest resources with the global demand for wood? Is it creating a problem of monoculture? These are all questions, but in industry, we don't need to just answer now, today, but we're really going to need to be able to answer in the future. We're seeing a really quick shift, certainly in Europe, from many plastic products to paper-based packaging, but brands are only going to do this if they're really confident and they can be absolutely sure the long-term sustainable benefits. So I would say for the packaging producers, actually, two sides using these messages, using the messages to help explain the sustainable nature of paper. I think this is really, really important. I think the time is here and now. There is a great opportunity. There is definitely an anti-plastic sentiment, but the paper industry really needs to focus on making sure that we can answer those questions about why paper is the sustainable choice and to be able to answer them robustly. I think there's also a really great opportunity as well. I know this is something you're looking to explore, that for those brands who have used paper, as you gave the example earlier, great marketing devices these brands can use that, tells their customers what they've done. I'm made for paper. You can recycle me very easily. Just put me in a recycling bin. So, I think as an industry, for paper-based packaging, we certainly should be ready, able to talk about the sustainable nature of our products, but we should also be in the marketing helping brands tell that story about why paper is sustainable and why it should be the right choice.
Yeah, I think in Australia we have what's called the Australian Packaging Covenant, and this is in partnership with the federal government's targets. They have established those regulations, and they'll be coming into sort of more legislative or formal legislation in Australia in a couple of years. What I often communicate is fibre-based packaging currently meets all of those requirements. So, fibre-based is a great solution, but you raise really interesting points around monoculture, about forest resources, about how as an industry we can continue to be a reforestation industry, not a deforestation industry. And I think part of we've got some, we're meeting all of those APCO targets, absolutely. And there's the fibre-based packaging has wonderful solutions. I mentioned IKEA before with their pallets. Absolute Vodka's doing some wonderful things. There's a lot of great stories around fibre-based packaging. However, we must, a little bit what we were saying earlier, must remain really mature and sophisticated as an industry to continue to improve. And I'm again applaud the mills for some of the work they're doing around biodiversity and harvesting when they do their tree harvesting, how they can ring fence, they can protect species, flora and fauna. So lots of really great things are coming out of the packaging discussion, which I welcome. I think the more we talk about, improve and get on the table, the better. I've got one more question about greenwashing, and then we might be close to time. Greenwashing is a real bugbear of mine. I know we run the anti-greenwashing campaign globally under two signs, and there's about to be a new release, which is terrific. It's alive and well in Australia and New Zealand. How can we really stamp this out? Do you see cycles? I mean, the Adobe, it just never ceased. That just, I'm speechless about that. We have had chats with Adobe a number of years ago. Now you have thankfully shown them and to see sense. Are we seeing cycles? Or are we seeing the same companies with reoccurrence? What are you seeing across the greenwashing space?
It does differ from international region. In Europe, there is no doubt that greenwash seems to be increasing. A big concern, particularly in Europe, is from retailers. Many who have made decisions to move away from catalogs and door drops, not for environmental reasons, for cost reasons. There's a lot of competition within Europe, and it's a way to remove costs. But like the Bowden example, there are also good examples of retailers who use print very, very effectively. We've got two big growing retail brands in Europe, Lidl and Aldi. I'm not sure if they've made their way down under yet, but these brands are huge users of paper and print because they realize there's no better way than to put their brand into people's hands. I don't think greenwash is going to change in the short term, Kelly. We are seeing more companies making misleading statements, and I think the other really important thing is I don't sometimes think they do it deliberately. Someone in the marketing departments said, look, we need to reduce our amount of direct mail. How do we do that? Oh, I know, we'll write to all of our customers and tell them to go digital, and it will be better for the planet, without really thinking it through. And I think that's one of the reasons, two sides needs to be there. We need to challenge and call out misleading statements when we see them. And I don't think always companies do it deliberately, but they believe that they are making these statements because it is better for the environment, and we need to engage them and challenge them that it isn't based on fact. But I don't think we are going to be able to stop brands from wanting to reduce costs. And that's why it's also important, as well as challenging on the environment, that we're also out there heavily promoting the ROI, the effectiveness that print delivers. And I know that's something you do with your stakeholders, but just to remind these organizations, and particularly agencies, but actually there is nothing better than physically to put a brand in the consumer's hand than to actually put it through their mailbox and give it in paper. A lot of research, as you're familiar with, done by many of the postal operators, show that stuff that comes through your door, it's kept, it's retained, it's shared, it's passed on. It's too easy for the digital communications to be missed. So I really hope, as well as tackling greenwash, as an industry, we're also heavily focused on promoting the effectiveness and role that print has within media communications.
Yeah, I think we've seen a few examples. Probably the largest and most recent was just at the tail end of COVID. Coles, as one of our large supermarkets here, uh, stopped letterbox distribution of their catalogues. They came out and talked about how many trees they were saving. Obviously, greenwashing. If they were really interested in the environment, they would significantly reduce their television advertisements because that's one of the heaviest footprint medias. Having said that, when you talk to effectiveness, since making that decision, their largest competitor, Woolworths, has picked up $5 billion in market share, and Woolworths have gone on record and said they're quite happy to own the letterbox. So maybe they'll come back in at some point, but it's just interesting that a marketing decision, for whatever reason that they can make their decisions, then becomes, oh, we're doing it to save trees, which is obviously not the case, but paper gets dragged into that greenwashing discussion. So we'll continue to fight the good fight. To everyone listening, send any example that you see of greenwashing into the team. We'll write to the organisation, give them some information with a fact sheet about paper and print. As Jonathan says, sometimes these organisations simply don't have the facts. That's part of what Two Sides is about, raising awareness. So if anyone does see anything, send it in. We will contact the brand. It also keeps you as members away. Some of these brands might be your customers or prospective customers. So that way, if we manage it for you, we can correct the greenwashing. And we're very proud of our Visual Media Association envelope, which is go paper, go digitalist, and plant more trees, where we then talk about how we're a reforestation industry. So maybe think about putting something like that on your envelopes, which leads me to probably my wrapping up now. The key takeaway stats from today: we've got a renewable resource in paper, highly recyclable, whether it's from household products or even in commercial applications. Household products in Australia, over 90% of paper products are recycled. Commercially, we're in 77% recycling rates. So we have very high recycling rates across paper products. We are a reforestation industry. We're a sustainably focused industry where we focus on reducing our carbon footprint. From a manufacturing perspective, since 1996, Australia has had one of the highest reductions in its carbon footprint, 96%, which is significant. Dr. Philip Lawrence has a thesis on this, so we have all of the research to back it up. These are really important stats, and I encourage every member, every industry stakeholder, anyone working across paper and print, to start understanding some of these key takeouts, these key facts, the barbecue conversation, the elevator pitch, where do you work, this is what I work, and have those stats top of mind. But also use everything that we have across Australia and New Zealand under the Two Sides campaign, but also on our website, you can click which country and you can view all the other countries around the world that are active participants. They've got lots of useful content. If you're getting paper from Europe, have a look at some of the European countries' content. UK, North America, there's a lot of paper, not so much from Canada, but there is some coming from Canada through other streams as well. So I thank you, Jonathan. I am a consummate professional. You know all of this content, and you're so passionate about the Two Sides campaign, our industry, and I thank you on behalf of that, but also love working with you and the team, and I thank you for giving your time today. I really do appreciate it. The next week, as we get on to, as I say, moving through our webinar series, we need to be very conscious next week. We're not recording this. It's a discussion around cybersecurity with Fiona Homan, the Director of National Anti-Scam Centre, which is run by the ACCC. Given the content and given that the ACCC is obviously federal government department or facilitated department, the Fiona will not be, we do not have permission to record it, so it'll be live attendance only. Fiona will talk through the insights regarding scams across Australia. We know this is a big problem. It's an important discussion to be having with your customers, particularly if you're managing data for them. We know a lot of our our members are printing and digitally publishing content across a common platform. So understanding cybersecurity but also having a discussion about the role of transactional mail and acquisitional mail and the importance of print in a very high cybersecurity threat environment. The role ScamWatch plays across the ACCC, it's a terrific website, great resource. It's updated daily. It's got a tracking meter, which is really useful, particularly for those who are working with charities and mail houses and the like. So how we can utilise some of this content from ScamWatch and the ACCC as industry influencers, our customers specify what they want. However, our knowledge can influence. Look, if you go 100% digital with that, there might be this risk to data. So perhaps have a consideration across perhaps a print output. Where we have just under 60%, sorry, 59.8% of scams are from digital devices. We're at 1.2 from printed publications. So we are well and truly in the green is good lane across cybersecurity. This is not one to miss. As I say, there will be class notes available. However, the webinar will not be recorded. So if you do want to hear Fiona's great wisdom and great presentation, which will be a real cracker, attendance is imperative. Again, as we wrap up, I shout out to Mark, Henry, Lisa, Christina, and the entire RICO team for their support, and to Luke and team at Media Super. Thank you for your sponsorship. Thank you for your partnership. We can't get this great content to our members without your support, and it is indeed valued. I look forward to seeing you all, same bat channel, same bat time next week. Thank you again to Jonathan. Take care all and enjoy your week ahead.